Hello, today I'm going to be presenting on Uncovering Personal Histories, a technology-mediated approach to eliciting reflection on identity transitions. I am Oliver Haimson, and this paper was co-authored by Megh Marathe. And just wanted to mention that Megh and I took sort of an opposite approach geographically. I did my PhD at UC Irvine and then moved to University of Michigan, where I'm faculty now. Megh did their PhD at University of Michigan, then moved to UCI for a postdoc, and now they're faculty at Michigan State. So many identity transitions are complex processes that take months or years. And for researchers studying identity transitions using interview methods, it can be difficult to know what questions to ask about those processes. And this is especially difficult because people often have difficulty recalling their emotions from the past. We know that information visualization can be a powerful tool for reflection and insight on personal data. And so in this work, we present a new research approach to enable participants to reflect on past identity transitions. And the approach is showing participants sentiment visualizations of their longitudinal social media data. And this approach combines 4 different elements: personal social media data, sentiment analysis, information visualization, and longitudinal representation. And the novelty in this approach is really in the presentation. So that's visualizing longitudinal trends and patterns. The source, which is social media data that's authored by the participant. And then the purpose, which is to enable participants to reflect on and expand on their personal life histories. So this is an example of the types of visualizations that we showed to participants during interviews. This visualized their Tumblr transition blog data over the entire period of time that they had been keeping that blog. What participants saw did not have these labels on it, but this is just showing the different sentiment measures that we used from tools like Vader and Luke. The context that we did this research in was gender transition, which is an important example of a life change that includes many different complex elements over time. And we did interviews with 20 Tumblr transition bloggers, so people who had been keeping a blog documenting their gender transition. And at the time that we were doing the study, Tumblr was one of the primary online spaces where trans people were building community and discussing their transitions. So in addition to the interviews, we did this sentiment analysis and longitudinal visualization of Tumblr transition blog content. And then we showed participants this visualization of their Tumblr data during the interviews. So the results here focus on 3 themes that I'll go into. The first is that sentiment graphs help participants reflect on their personal histories. Next, sentiment graphs help participants recall new data. And then finally, some participants had difficulty relating to sentiment graphs. Most of the participants, so about 16 out of 20, were able to make connections between the sentiment graphs, the changes they saw in the graphs, and particular identity changes that they had experienced during those time periods. This participant said, okay, so that was 2nd semester into my sophomore year. So they were referring to the graphs. Let me put myself in that place. At the time, I was at a super high in my life. I felt like I was kind of taking over the world. That's when my blog was starting to take off. And then referring to a dip in the graph, they continued, I'm not sure what a dip would be. I did have to go to my brother's graduation and kind of present in this weird, ambiguous, gender-neutral presentation at my school that I go to. That was a big low. After that, everything was great. So this is an example of the sentiment graph's ability to enable reflection for participants in a way that traditional interview techniques and existing elicitation techniques often do not. So putting people back into particular periods of their lives to reflect is a difficult endeavor during research, and sentiment graphs can help with this. Sentiment graphs also often brought up experiences that the participants had not yet mentioned in the interview. So some participants hadn't written about these experiences on their blogs either. And so the researcher would not have known to ask them about these events. So in this way, sentiment graphs help participants recall and reflect on new data that they hadn't thought to bring up before viewing the graphs. Participant 5 said, April was a sad month for me last year. I was coming out and my great-grandmother passed, and I was dating somebody and it was all bad. So that's funny, you can see that in the graphs. Yeah, actually looking at the months, I can see, oh, yep, there's the dip. There's the recuperation, and there's the trail of where I just disappeared for a couple months. So P5 did actually write about some of these experiences, such as coming out, on their blog, but other experiences, such as their great-grandmother's death, weren't mentioned at all. It might be that the computational sentiment measures picked up P5's negative affect during that time period when they were writing about other topics. It could also be that P5 used the sentiment visualizations to find connections to experiences during that time period. But either way, the sentiment graphs enabled us to elicit important information about difficult experiences that P5 hadn't mentioned until this point in the interview, after we'd been talking for roughly an hour. There were some participants, so about 7 participants out of 20, that initially had difficulty relating to the sentiment graphs. But upon further discussion and explanation, most of them were able to use the graphs to reflect on past experiences to some extent. So participant 3 said, "It is a difficult question. You're asking me if that squiggly line represents how I feel." This quote brings up a fundamental complexity that arises when using sentiment graphs for reflection. It's difficult for some people to connect their feelings over a long period of time with a squiggly line on a graph. And yet, they were still often able to reflect on past events when presented with these sentiment graphs. So in this work, we construct a concept we call transition history from below. And this draws from historian E.P. Thompson's History from Below, which emphasizes centering marginalized people's experiences and considers them as the experts of their narratives. A gender transition history from below provides insights on physical and mental health complexities during transition that are missing from mainstream narratives that are written by medical experts. So, for example, a long history of research drew false conclusions about trans people based on data sources that were medical professionals who worked with trans populations instead of trans people themselves. And this often continues into the present day. We consider trans people to be the experts of their own experiences, and we bring together multiple data sources to understand their identity change experiences. So we also provide some insights into how to apply this research method. So in the paper, we discuss data collection, data analysis and visualization, use in interviews, analysis, potential difficulties, and then most importantly, the ethical considerations of this work. And I will refer you to the paper for more information on that. So in conclusion, we present a new data elicitation approach, showing participants longitudinal sentiment visualizations of their social media data as a reflective tool for uncovering personal histories. Thank you.